Let's take a look at the key phases that we need to have to mount an allergic or atopic response. The first is loss of tolerance. What does this mean? Well, normally our cells will not be reacting to peanuts or to pollens. We normally can tolerate these when they are being perceived as allergens, when they are perceived as danger signals by the antigen presenting cell or by the epithelium. They will engage the innate lymphoid cells and the Th cells and trigger their response and their differentiation into a Th2 or an ILC2. And these cells are the ones that will be responsible for the next phases of allergic and atopic responses. So the first thing is that these cells are now hyperreacting to an allergen. They lost the tolerance to that allergen. The next thing is this bias of an immune priming to either a Th2 or an ILC2 response. What does this mean? Well, these differentiated cells are going to produce cytokines, and these cytokines are very specific of this phenotype because they are the ones that will create the next level of response. The third phase of the allergic and atopic responses, which is required for these kind of conditions, is activation upon re-exposure. There is memory. This just doesn't happen once. If it happens once and then it disappears, it means that the system became tolerant again. But if you do have an allergic or atopic condition, this just triggers a faster response by the memory B cells that will very quickly be differentiated into plasma cells producing the IgE. And this is what is very characteristic of the allergic and atopic responses. Now, one thing that's important to say is that when we look at the characteristics of this response, we call it type 1 hypersensitivity. Type 2, 3, and 4 hypersensitivity responses were described in 1964 by Gell and Coombs. Type 1 is the one that characterizes allergic responses, and it's called type 1 because it was the first one ever described in the 19th century. However, because the phenotype of the Th cells and the innate lymphocyte cells is the second phenotype, Th2 or ILC2, when we talk about an immune response is type 2. So don't be confused if you're reading clinical documents and you're talking about a clinical response is type 1 hypersensitivity response. If you're looking at an immune response paper, more basic science, and you're talking about an immune response is type 2, but it's the same response. In one case we call it type 1, in the other one we call it type 2, but remember to look at the next words. It's either type 1 hypersensitivity or a type 2 immune response. We're talking about the same.